Hi everyone, it's Andrea Haas from Elm Tree Education, and I'm back with another Lit Bit segment where I answer teacher questions about literacy instruction in just a little bit. If you have your own question about literacy instruction as a K-5 teacher, make sure that you go to that link below and submit your question, and I'll pop that back up again at the end. So let's get to today's question. All right, this teacher asked, any whole class fluency routines that are effective? Why, yes, there are. First, let's talk about fluency and why is it important. So you may know this might be some review, but fluency is composed of three components: accuracy, or the ability to decode and or recognize words; rate, the speed with which you read; and prosody, which is really like, sometimes we say like the expression, so your intonation, your stress, your phrasing that you might use. Now, all three of these are interrelated. However, I have found that some kids can get hyper-focused on rate and think that reading is a race, when obviously that's not the goal, is to read as fast as you possibly can and get it done. Because obviously we want to understand what we read. So sometimes that can be a consequence of when you might use an easy CBM or Dibble's test, where it's asking you to find the words correct per minute, and then the kids get really in tune into that. So if that's the case, you want to actually maybe just tell them, guys, it's really three things here. We've also had to focus on making sure that we sound like an expert if we're reading nonfiction, or we sound like the characters if we're reading a fiction text. Okay, so just one little caveat there. All right, the other thing I want to say is that the relationship between fluency and comprehension is very connected, and there is an extensive amount of research that supports this. I'm sure most of you teachers out there are saying, yep, totally, like makes total sense to me. And here's why. Because when you become more fluent, it frees up your brain. Obviously, you're not having to labor over things, so that you can really think more deeply about what you're reading. And our research also shows that if you are a proficient oral reader with good expression, you tend to actually also be great with comprehension even when you're silently reading. So it can also predict comprehension, not just influence. You may have seen this model, and you may have not. It's only a couple years old, and I have been finding that most people right now have been focusing on the simple view of reading in Scarborough's Rope. Duke and Cartwright took Scarborough's Rope, but then they added another layer on it from their research, and I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds on this because I could, but they actually also bring in executive functioning skills, and they talk a little bit about these bridging processes, and actually fluency is the bridge between word recognition and comprehension. And so those kids who are struggling might have a hard time actually crossing that bridge. I also find that fluency is not typically emphasized in curriculum, even though it has such a big impact on comprehension. So it is important that you're doing some sort of fluency work with your students, and you want them to learn it with automaticity. Just like when we are learning how to drive a car, it's a very complex task, but if we're proficient at it, we can do it without much thought. In fact, we can have the radio on. Our kids might be talking to us in the back seat, but we're not having to stop and think, just like we did during the days of driver's ed, where we're really focused, like, where's my hands, where are my mirrors? Okay, if I turn here, what's my speed? Like all of those kinds of things that you focused on when you were new at it. If you're a proficient driver now, you do it automatically, and that's the goal that we want for our kids for reading. We want them to be able to do it automatically, so they can just do it with automaticity, not even think about it, and then can focus all that brain power in on the comprehension. Okay. I want to be really clear here that while some kids may need more intensive intervention when it comes to fluency, that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm not talking about supporting the individual. I'm talking about supporting the whole class, because that was the question that the teacher asked. There are some other things you could also be doing with an individual if you're doing some intervention, but we're not going to get into that today. If you want, though, submit a question, and I'd love to address it in a future Lit Bit segment. Okay. So here's what we are going to be talking about. Repeated reading is valuable at any age. That's what the research says. Even if you think your kids are, well, they don't read out loud anymore. They just are silent readers because they're fifth graders. No, actually, they do benefit. And the research has shown that repeated reading in one text actually supports their fluency in other texts. There actually is a transferability, even though you might think, well, they only really practice this one. So yeah, of course they know this one really well because we repeated it and repeated reading it over and over again. But the research shows that they repeat one text, those skills go right on and transfer to another text. So that's another real big case for wanting to keep doing this in your classroom, to have that happen in your classroom. Now, the research also says that short bursts of intentional fluency focus is so much better than the on-the-fly fluency instruction once in a while. Okay? So you, maybe you just go, oh, okay, well now we should maybe we should practice some fluency because I'm noticing this with my small group, or as a whole class, oh, today we're just do a poem for fun. Just doing it randomly does not have much effectiveness as having it become a regular routine that's done in your classroom. Now, they would say it needs to be done daily, the research, but I say if you're doing anything more than 0, you're winning. So even if it can be 3 days a week or 2 days a week, just trying to build it in, I think you'll see the gains compared to just not doing it at all. Okay, here's something else I want to keep in mind for you because I feel very passionate about this. This one is one that if anybody out there has taken a pre-service literacy course from me, you know that the one thing I wanted you to remember above all else was that you would not have your students round robin read in your classroom. I am on a mission to make sure that this practice of round robin reading or popcorn reading, which in some cases is even worse, are eradicated from classrooms. I'm sure many of you out there were in an elementary school classroom where the teacher called on one student to start reading out of the social studies textbook. Okay, you're going to read a paragraph, and then so-and-so who sits next to you, you're going to read the next paragraph, and then the next paragraph or page or whatever it was, a selection of it. The only thing these practices bring to kids is anxiety. They are not improving their fluency. They're too focused. They're definitely not improving their comprehension of the content, if that was your goal. They are so focused on counting ahead to see when they're going to read, or with the case of popcorn reading or the pull a kid at random reading, they are so stressed that it could happen to them at any moment. They have completely flipped their lids. They do not have the logical thinking part of their brain to take in or get anything out of that practice. So please, 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 there is no research at all. In fact, it would be the contrary that supports these two practices in classrooms. So you will not be doing this in your classroom. Yes, that's my mic drop moment. I had to do that. I just discovered that I could do that on Canva. I got very excited. Okay, so there is a lot of research out there. I'd be happy to provide texts, other things that have people published that would support you if you really want to go deeper into this. I'm just going to highlight some high-level practices for whole groups since this is what the teacher was asking for. But they are all based in research. Okay, the first thing is read alouds and shared reading. Modeling fluent reading, but calling it out. I mean, obviously you're modeling fluent reading every time you read aloud to kids or you do a shared reading text, but you want to think aloud about why you're using a certain tone of voice, or you're emphasizing a particular word, or you're paying attention because of that punctuation and the phrasing that you're doing. So it is a model. It doesn't necessarily give the kids practice, but at least it's a model for them to hear what fluent reading sounds like. And it's really important for you to call out some of those things that we don't necessarily always focus on with fluency assessments, but are important. Okay. Here's a routine that you can do in your classroom. It's a repeated reading routine. or routines, I guess, because it's kind of a collection of them. You can technically do this in one lesson one day, and that's it, like 20, 25 minutes. Or perhaps if you're someone who's like, I want to put these fluency routines into my practice, but I just can't afford 20 to 25 minutes a day for it because I'm already having a hard time getting everything in, maybe this is more like a 5-minute a day thing. And so maybe you break this up across a week where you introduce a text on a Monday and then they do the performance on a Friday. But let me go in and explain these steps so that you have a little bit more clarity about that. So first, you're going to model reading a text to the class. It could be a poem. It can be a nonfiction informational text. It could be an article. It could be the copy of a famous speech for something you're studying, a time period you're studying in social studies. You could be reading to your buddy class partner, so you want to pull something that would be supportive to your buddy class that's learning about butterflies. You know, whatever it is, poems, songs, all those things, but just doing a variety of them. Kids naturally are more fluent in narrative than they are in informational text, so you kind of want to keep that in mind, and you also want to keep it short. So really, depending on the age of your students, you would take that into account, but overall, no more than 200 words. Like 100 to 200 words is probably great. A lot of people do a reader's theater, which is totally fine, and that's still a great way to practice fluency. And some curricula have them, and then they're differentiated parts that kids can learn. But I'm going to be talking about us as a whole class reading the same thing to practice, okay? So here's how it might go. You model reading the text to the class with a fluent voice and calling out certain things about the text. Then you ask the kids to join you in choral reading, where you all read it together as one. Then you might do echo reading, where I read a line, you read that exact same line or 2 lines, you know, whatever the natural break is for your text. Then you put kids in small groups or partnerships where they would be doing some partner reading, probably a little bit of choral and echo happening there. There's some other protocols you could use, but I'm not going to get into all those right now. But you don't ask them to actually independently practice reading it out loud until they have been doing all of this repeated reading prior to that. And then independence is like another layer before they go to performance. Now, again, having performance be authentic is really awesome if it can have an authentic audience, whether it's your office manager, your principal, parents coming in, your buddy class, the other classroom from across the hall coming in, just to each other. Sometimes you're just doing it for just reading it to each other, and maybe you divide kids up into small groups and then they practice performing in small groups. It's not a whole group thing for the performance, but no matter what, giving them something authentic that they need to do after they've become fluent with this text that they have repeatedly read over and over and over again, because remember, that's what the research says will influence fluency the most, and that they'll transfer it to their other reading from one text that you've picked out. It'll transfer and grow their fluency in other areas, other texts. Okay, so that was a lot. Sorry. This was a little bit longer of a lit bit. Usually I try to keep them under 10 minutes. This one is a little bit over, so I apologize for that. But I wanted to make sure that I really dug deep in some things that I thought might be some new information, especially that active view of reading and thinking about the routines that you might implement. So I just took a little bit more time today. Okay, let's see if I can wrap it up into under 15. So, as promised, if you want to submit another question about reading and writing instruction, please go to this link and fill out the form and submit your question. And I just might pick it for my next Lit Bits segment. Thanks, everybody. Take care. See you next time.